Okay, today we are going to be talking about how we arrive at your ultimate net number if you settle a claim for personal injury or negligence. This is not as simple as it appears, and in many cases, folks assume, well, if I settle the case for $100,000, I would get $100,000. That's not how it works because of, as I will explain, multiple variables that go into play, including attorney's fees, disbursements, potential liens, etc. Now, the numbers I'm going to give you today are obviously just pulled from thin air. They are used for an example. They do not necessarily equate to what you might expect in the event that you have a negligence or a personal injury action. But it's meant to be an example of what it might look like when you sit down and figure out how much you will ultimately, or your family will ultimately receive following this type of a claim. So let's say, for the sake of argument, that you were involved in a serious car accident and that the case had to be litigated to a point just before trial. So you've got a settlement of $300,000, which was the full extent of the insurance policy because you suffered significant fractures and had surgeries, etc. So we start with the gross number, which is $300,000. Now, because the case is so far along, let's assume that your attorney has had to spend a significant amount of money on experts, on filing fees, on medical records fees, etc. I'm going to use the number $30,000, although typically it might be something less than that. Okay, but let's assume that it cost $30,000 to get the case this far and get this settlement. Now, your attorney will likely have given you the option to have paid for this yourself out of pocket, but in the overwhelming majority of cases, clients would rather have the attorney advance the fees and then be reimbursed at the conclusion of the case. So in this situation, if there's $30,000 in disbursements, that then brings the starting net to $270,000. Now, from that net, your attorney will deduct his or her fee, which is typically agreed to by a fee retainer, and in personal injury and negligence cases is often 1/3 of any recovery. So now we would take 1/3 of that, which would be $90,000. We are now down to $180,000 net. Now, in most cases, there will not be a lien. However, if the case involves nursing home negligence or medical treatment by an older person from Medicare or any other Medicaid type of care, and Medicare or Medicaid has paid for any of the medical bills, they will be looking for reimbursement for what they have paid. And that also comes out of the portion of the settlement. So now let's assume that Medicare has paid $20,000. That now brings the total to $160,000. That is the net that you would ultimately, or the family would ultimately take home after all is said and done. So it's important to understand that this is how this process works, and that you are not going to ultimately receive the full amount of the settlement because, frankly, you had to hire an attorney. The attorney's skills and experience got you to this point, so they have to be paid. And Medicare, Medicaid, and other lien holders absolutely have to be paid from the portion of the settlement proceeds. So the net in a situation like this might look something more like that than like that top number. But ultimately, hopefully, it's still something more than you otherwise would have had, and hopefully it helps you move along the path towards your progression, towards your recovery. If you have any questions about any of this, feel free to reach out to us. We're happy to have a conversation.